Hello and welcome to the after party. I am No White Guilt, and tap days are my favorite day of the week because I get to be with all of you, our wonderful and intelligent guests, and I get to work with my dear friend and colleague, Jared George of the Great Order. Now, to watch the show in replay in Europe, please change your location on YouTube to the United States, or you will almost assuredly, like our guest today, have to use a VPN to watch the show when it is in replay. Please share that information whenever you come across someone who is having difficulty finding the material. Let them know how they too can begin to go free and serve white well-being. Use a VPN. Appearing on the honors roll call today is the glorious Laura, Jeffrey, Johnny, that specific gentleman, Happy Cat, DB Cooper. A big thank you to Janice, and a special thank you to the very generous donation by Jay, and also a special thanks to the great Sam Dixon. Sam has had so much influence on me over the years that even though I am No White Guilt, he is the father of No White Guilt. And indeed, I see him as a father figure. If you have not heard of him, your life is poorer for the absence. Now, these good people on the honors roll call are heroes who have recently or in the past made monthly commitments to white well-being. And for that, I am eternally grateful. Before going any further, I have a few mentions to make, ladies and gentlemen. First thing I want to do is thank the great Jack White for the Ballad of Sky King, which we played here the other day on my channel. Originally, I think it was premiered over on White Art Collective, Jeff's channel. And thank you very much, Jeff, for doing the good work that you're doing. And a big thank you to Jack White for this fantastic song. I mentioned yesterday during the stream, and I want to echo it again, that I know that many of us, because of the levity that Sky King holds in his voice, the innocence that is on his face in the photos that we have seen, we are wont to see him and what he did as something that was lighthearted. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing could be further from the truth. Jack's song captures the pain not only of Sky King, but of all of the white men and women, primarily white men out there, who see no future for themselves because the networks that their families have created have been destroyed by anti-whiteism, the networks that would have helped them to get ahead in life and do well in life. And not only have these networks been destroyed, but so have all of the opportunities that are afforded to the average or basic individual for them to get ahead. It is legal in Western countries to discriminate against white men, and particularly and whites in general. And white men know this. And when Sky King asks if he could get a job when he lands that plane, and the person on the line lies to him and says that they would probably give him a job doing anything, he honestly says from a place most painful in his heart that he wouldn't get hired because he's a white guy. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to come together to prevent more of these suicides. His laughter in that hour and his smiles on his face was gallows humor, because he knew at that moment that he was going to be putting an end to the suffering and a lifelong of suffering that he anticipated living, being in the Western civilization under this anti-white thraldom. So big thank you to Jack White for immortalizing Sky King with that song. And I will honestly say that because of the gravity that struck me in the words at the beginning of that song of Sky King, with the guy in the tower, and the tune, the piece, honestly wet my eyes. My heart goes out to everyone who is suffering. And if you hear my voice and you are suffering and you do feel alone, I want you to become acquainted with a project called Nat Connect. That way of the world has started, and the great Laura, I mentioned just a few moments ago, is working with him on. In fact, yesterday during the stream, that I mentioned Nat Connect, Way of the World, and if we could get a moderator, one of our wonderful moderators I see in the chat today, thank you for being here. If we could get one of them to put Way of the World's YouTube channel up and maybe the specific video where he discusses this Nat Connect, Laura revealed to us that during that stream, in a 1 hour period after me mentioning Nat Connect, that she was able to connect 6 new people in 1 hour. And then I believe 2 more after the stream was finished. We are saving lives. If you are out there and you feel alone, you feel like there's no hope for you in this anti-white world, you see the reality of the struggle and the hurdles that are put in front of you, do not descend into drug abuse and defacing your skin and your bodies and your lives. Do not descend into this evil. Reach out instead to us. Reach out by way of the great work of Way of the World and Laura, Nat Connect. They will put you in contact with someone somewhere in your area. You will have, at a bare minimum, a pen pal, someone to commiserate with in the struggles that you face in your life. And Way of the World informed me during the stream, the Going Free stream yesterday, that indeed there are many in real life meetings taking place as a result of Nat Connect. So you have a friend out there who is in the same boat, who is waiting to hear from you. Please look to Laura and Way of the World for that help. And thank you both very much. I also want to mention Philosophicat is doing and making an extraordinary series on Julius Evola, digging deep into the esoteric elements of that work and bringing them up from the depths to a place where all of us can understand and appreciate the great works and the great ideas that are communicated by that thinker. Please head on over to Philosophicat's channel, watch the first video, and click the bell and be ready for the subsequent videos she will be making. Again, if someone, one of our glorious moderators, could be so kind as to put her link in the chat, I would most appreciate it. And a big thank you to Philosophicat as well for serving white well-being with all that she does, and particularly now with this new project about Julius Evola. I also want to give a huge thank you, and if we could get a huge round of applause of raging emojis in the chat, for Phoenix Fire, who was on fire when she found out that Store Envy censored No White Guilt Collectibles, my store, from their platform. Of course, they censored me for being a heretic, for not being anti-white enough. And when she found out about this, Phoenix Fire got immediately to work to undo all of the effort that the anti-whites had made to inflict harm on the good and loving work that we are doing here. Several others stepped up, threw their hat in the ring, and said they were willing to rebuild the site as well on another platform. So just so you know, anti-whites, when we as a people are serving white well-being and serving it with love, this will always be the response. You're not going to have people that complain and disappear. You're going to have people that step up. And as I said yesterday, as is the case with Phoenix Fire here, we step in the way of that speeding bullet racing for the white child. We are not going to allow you to inflict any more injury. We are motivated by love, and more people continue to step up. It is a wonderful thing. Also, another person stepping up, I'll mention before moving on, and that is, if you would like me to appear on your show, do you have a radio show? Do you have a YouTube channel? Do you do a podcast? Would you like me to appear? And are you and I not already in contact? If we are not already in contact, please reach out with a direct message to Althea on Twitter. I will drop her link in the chat if somebody doesn't beat me to it. Althea is now my acting marketing director. So if you would like me to appear on her show, you and I are already not in contact, please reach out to Althea and we will set it up, make sure that I can appear on your show. Again, another response, filled with love, as a result of the pressure that the anti-whites are putting on us with censorship and silencing our activists in all corners across the globe. They will not win. They are the ones who are motivated by hate and the blackest of souls. We are motivated by love and a desire to preserve and protect what is ours, what should be preserved and protect. And now to get on to the Super Chat crown winner of last week. The crown goes to Roy Danton, one of our favorites, for investing a total of 50 white babies saving dollars. Veneration and applause to you, my good brother. Thank you so much. In second place was another crowd favorite, Luke, investing $30. Thank you as well, good sir. Ladies and gentlemen, Super Chat on YouTube at 33% or on Entropy at 15%, where you can also watch the stream, ask and vote on questions, and participate in any polls I may post. Or, as always, you can dig down into the video's description for a familiar alternative at 4%. Jared and I evenly share the Super Chats with our guests here on the After Party. Today, we are getting tapped into Phil Simpson from the YouTube channel Mimir's Brunnr. Phil is the founder, writer, and narrator of Mimir's Brunnr project, a project designed to explore the ancient past of Northern Europe and Europe in general. The history of Europe is unequaled, and nowhere has seen all the dramas of men play out in such spectacular fashion. Phil and his team wish to rekindle the embers of the European fire, to celebrate her history, and to once again hold her children and our ancestors in the reverence they deserve. It is our great pleasure to have the creative and talented creator of Mimir's Brunnr here with us today. Jared, please do the honors, sir.
Phil, welcome to the show. Anyone who's not familiar, Mimir's Brunnr is an extraordinary channel and has quickly become one of my favorites. I've been very moved by a lot of the pieces, and we have a lot to talk about tonight. But first, because there's such a high production value to what Phil and his team does, Phil, I just wanted to welcome you and then give you the floor to first just briefly tell the audience a little about how it came to be, how you make these videos, the team behind it, the music, everything being original, and how you put it together. So welcome, Phil, and why don't you tell us a little about how you make these extraordinary videos for starters?
Well, hello there, Jason and Jared. Thank you for having me on, first of all. It's a pleasure. I hope I'm coming through okay. Just get the nod.
Indeed. Yeah, you sound great.
No, how we make them is, well, as was stated in the intro there, I did found the site a while ago. But the video started about a year ago, and that was when Riss, the magician behind the videos, is the technical gifted one there, which is something that I lack a little bit of. He contacted me because he liked some of my articles, and we decided to make one of them into a video, which was Consequence of Cowardice. But it was taking us a bit of time. We were both new to this. So in the meantime, we made a few smaller ones and started the Cimbrian War project, which has been an ongoing series. And the last one is coming up pretty soon, which will be the finale, which will be a much more feature length. And then we got in touch pretty early on with Hallinder, who is a really gifted composer. And he allowed us to use his music at first, but he's more and more now composing completely original pieces for the works. And how we do it is pretty much we allow everybody to have the artistic freedom that they need. And by this, I'll write the piece and then I'll record a narration of the piece. Then it will either go to Riss. If Hallinder's too busy or already working on a project, Riss will look through Hallinder's back catalogue and we'll get some music that fits. Then here put the beautiful visuals together. And I have little say in that. I just give it to him, and I trust him completely with that. And the same goes for Hallinder. If Hallinder's going to write a piece specifically for the video, it just goes to him, and he does what he wants with it. He'll position the sentences exactly where he wants them. And although that seems like, to a control freak like me, that's at first a little bit scary, I think allowing everybody to add their little bit really enhances the piece, because you get 3 layers to each video. You can listen to the words, and then if you watch it again a few times, I think some people have mentioned this, that they get something else from it because there's something hidden in the visuals. And then you've got the moods being set by Hallinder's music, and I think altogether it creates a very it creates pieces that I'm even shocked by and go, wow, that is really good. Which is kind of funny because it's changed sometimes so much from the original piece. It's added so much to it by these other 2 very gifted people, that it even impresses me. And I can watch one of the videos when it first gets released over and over again, because I'm quite it's a very good experience, and I really enjoy this experience with these guys, and I couldn't have asked for better people to work with. They're both brilliant guys in every way.
It's extraordinary. I was almost expecting you to say that you'd been old childhood friends or something, that there's such a connection. Yeah. But you're 3 guys who didn't know each other before this.
No. Now we are close. We do consider each other close friends, I'd hope. Well, I consider them at least.
Yeah.
No, and we get on really great. And it's just been a really great project that's just gone from strength to strength.
Yeah, you have a lot to be proud of. I can tell that there's those different layers there. And you, my friend, are an extraordinary narrator. Your voice and what you put into it is, you can just listen to the videos on that level, and you have quite a talent for that. So it segues well, and hopefully a lot of our audience have seen your videos, and what I'm about to say will mean so much more if they have. It segues well into our first topic, because you speak in your videos often about this life force and this concept of the life force in our ancestors and what that meant to them, something that transcended the mere biological animalistic urges. And you can tell that life force, that joy of life, is in your videos. It's palpable in your videos. So it's a great marriage of the content that you're making with this modern technology, and yet these hopefully timeless instincts that are in our people, even if unfortunately they're very perverted and muted and buried in a lot of us right now. And I think what you're doing, it's something that Jason and I are doing as well here, is trying to reawaken that. So I'd like to hear from you about that idea of the life force, and specifically related to something that you said in your videos that I found fascinating, which is the words for love and freedom. Both of these words were related in the old Germanic and Celtic languages. So if you could tell us a little about that.
Yeah, I'll start with the word, obviously. Well, the word freedom comes from a Proto-Germanic word, where in the Germanic language is frigiona. And that means to love, which comes from an earlier word in the Proto-Indo-European language for beloved, essentially. So the word freedom directly, through its etymology, leads to love. This is there's even examples of this in Norse mythology. Frigg, or Frigga, the wife of Odin, or Woden, as I call him, derives from love too. So we get that. So these words literally come through in our language, where love and freedom have been combined to almost mean the same thing. Which I found fascinating when I found out. So I put it into that piece, Consequence of Cowardice. And I think with the life force you're talking about, and it's overcoming the natural boundaries, I'm assuming you're talking a lot about, because Consequence of Cowardice is our biggest video, and that talks specifically on fear and the overcoming of fear to see something.
Yes, you can elaborate on that too.
Yeah, well, I mean, the life force that I'm talking about there, we're in fear, in Consequence of Cowardice and fear. It's more to do with our ideas of duty and love, and that if you wish to show your love, then you cannot be a slave. So it is about this sacrifice and our willingness to do that. And this is part of the European psyche, to see something beyond himself and bigger than him alone, his folk. And I think the European peoples as a whole if you look back at their histories, whether it be through tragedy or greatness, they've always, well, in the past at least, sorry, not always, we're starting to see a turn that's occurred later, which we'll get to later. Put the folk first, and it is this devotion to it, this devotion to something greater than yourself, that I think is although there are other peoples that do it, in the European, it has a certain beauty to it. We love drama. We love the dramas of life. There's no escaping that. I mean, even modern media abuses this. We have given us these soap operas and things to keep us chained into their system. But that life force, and I believe it comes from the folk soul, essentially, would be my more spiritual take on this, more like a Jungian idea of the folk soul and its archetypes about we're reborn. I mean, our ancestors, for the most part, did believe in reincarnation, as far as we can tell. And if you mess up the world this time, then you come back into a worse time. But yeah, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit there. I think I've gone a bit off too. Bring me back on course.
No, I have two things for you, and it's all setting it up nicely. One is that you give some examples, particularly from the story of the Cimbrian War. Mm-hmm. And you can tell people, if they're not familiar, a little what that is. Yeah. But it would strike our sensibilities as extremely unmodern and illiberal. And it would seem barbaric from one perspective, where they'd actually kill their family members if they were losing in war, because the whole thing is you'd rather be dead than be a slave. So why don't you give us paint us a picture of what some of the examples for a moment.
That actually was the inspiration behind Consequence of Cowardice. It was looking at that dark aspect, which at first, like you say there, you first read that and it conjures, I'm a father myself. So those images conjured were very shocking, to think that somebody could do that to their own children. But I knew that these people weren't evil. They weren't sadistic. They were trying to give a living. And for people that don't know, the Cimbrian War is when a group of people that were living in Jutland, which is modern-day Denmark, moved south in search of lands. There's some speculation. If you watch my our videos on this, you'll get a bit of an idea, but speculation to why they left. But they left in search of land, for what we can see, because that's what they ask the Romans at every meeting. Give us land, and we'll give you our swords. Yep, as a trade. We'll fight for you if you give us somewhere to live. But Rome has a few problems with that, because they have their own land reforms going on, etc., etc. And the Cimbrians then decide to essentially take by force, or try to. They make some very puzzling decisions along the way. They seem to be having quite a good time of it, but they end up meeting the Roman armies and defeating them several times. In fact, arguably one of the biggest ever losses they deal to the Roman army. And these are, like you say, just the Romans would call them barbarians, living very natural lives, should we say. And yeah, at the end of that sequence, they do get defeated. Sorry to spoil it for anybody before this last video, but I mean, it's quite common knowledge. And in the defeat, the Roman writings tell us that they killed their children. The women killed their children to prevent them becoming slaves. Is the only thing that we can really get from that. And when I looked at that deeper, I tried to really understand what was going on, because obviously this is no easy task, and I couldn't do it, certainly, no matter the circumstances. And then I had to dig deep into myself, and it was quite an emotional journey trying to understand that. And that is when I realized that there are worse things than death. Well, it's not when I realized, but when it highlighted to me, there are much worse things than death. Death is a final, an instant. And in nature, we do not see this. We do not see this level of torture. I mean, some animals do play with their prey to a point, but we do not see torture that goes on for, well, infinite, if you continue with the blood. And to be aware of that and to be able to take that action inspired Consequence of Cowardice, inspired me looking at what that driving force was. And the only force that could do that is love. I mean, as a father, like I say, there are worse things that could happen to my children, and I don't want to talk about that because, but there are worse things. Being at the hands of somebody that is has some sadistic nature. I mean, anybody. I mean, we get horror stories even today of people captured by some serial killer that keeps them alive in a basement for 20, 30 years. I mean, that horror, and I believe that is what the Kimberley were trying to prevent in that action. So although it may look to us quite shocking, it just shows you how much they valued life, how much they valued that gift, that they were not going to allow themselves to be subject to the whims of another. They must live their own life or none at all. And I think that was the ultimate ending to that piece.
Yeah, very well said. And I just want to add to that. First of all, a big hello to all of the stars that have shown up at the show tonight. I don't know, Jared, if you've noticed, it's like we've had the Big and Little Dipper and everything else show up. Andromeda has shown up here in our skies tonight with all of these spectacular personalities showing up. Great to see you all. I just wanted to mention that when we view things from different periods in history, we have to try to put ourselves in the shoes, and not just figuratively speaking, try to really understand what morality was like at that time, what the threat of death was like at that time, what the threat of torture and suffering was like at that time. And Phil's addressing it perfectly. I mean, to say that we hear these horror stories of someone in a basement who keeps some person captive and then tortures them in much more primitive times, that was much more likely to happen. It was much easier to make that happen. That was something that was not, like today, disease. And I mean, I have a dear friend who recently contracted an infection on the skin that would have very easily killed her before the advent of these medications. Thank you, white race, for these things. And instead of her dying and that being the end of her, she's going to continue on and God willing, live a fruitful, productive, and wonderful life, making memories. As, by the way, I want for everyone of all races, not just our people, but we here are standing up and fighting for our people. And part of standing up and fighting for our people, our well-being, is setting the record straight about the things that took place in history. And it's very easy for an anti-white to step in at this point in this narrative and say, look at these monsters back then. Look at what they did to their own children at this specific moment. And they're able to manipulate and misrepresent because people are mired in their current conditions. They think, well, even if they lost the war, it would be okay. I mean, there would be surely there would be a new leadership. Things would have to change, but kill your children? No, these people were on the edge of survival, in contact always with the natural world, the real world, where horrific things could take place. Never forget, ladies and gentlemen, that we as Western kind have reached into this mire, reached into this quagmire, and lifted and created civilization out of it. If it had not been for the work of our ancestors, the heroic work, the lives given for this cause, for you and I to live in these civilizations, none of it would exist. Try going out into the forest with none of the modern conveniences. Try forgetting the mathematics that you've learned. Try forgetting the language that you've learned. Limit all of this and see how well you will survive. That is the real world. That is the natural world. That is the world where the ultimate predator, another human being, could show up and do things to your children that are unspeakable. The kind of things, by the way, that are happening to our white babies in South Africa right now. And so these people did not do something that was barbarous or monstrous. These people took pity and took away the pain and suffering, took away the horror by these quick acts. I'm sure they made the act as quickly as they possibly could, the same way that we should, when we have to take the life of an animal, take it as quickly and painlessly as possible. They were preventing these children from suffering. And effectively, in a different way, we're doing that same work here today. When we step between the white child and the rabid dog, or the bullet that streaks across the battlefield, we're doing the same thing. We are offering up ourselves in love. They, at that moment, did all they could do, offer themselves. To me, that is a heartbreaking moment, that they faced a reality that was filled with such butchery that the final act of love was to, as quickly and painlessly, take the child's life and then their own. So it is something that if we're going to do anything, it should draw tears from our eyes and fill us with the glory of the love and the sacrifice that our people have been always willing to make in the hour of need. We do have a super chat, and I'm going to read it really quickly. $5 NWO Dispatcher, and we will move right along with this titillating interview. Writing, would it be worth it to incorporate folkism in a corporation, since governments have decoupled themselves from ethnicities? Probably be subverted. Folk Soul Incorporated. Well, I think surely, and we can get the opinions of my esteemed guest and colleague, but I think surely if it was effective, they would undermine it very easily in the courts. Just you can look back for some history at the World Church of the Creator and what they did to them, the name that they had taken for themselves, and all of the products that they had been selling with the name on the products. Clearly, it was a breach of law, what the courts did to them. And again, demonstrating that we live under an anti-white tyranny. We also have, by way of the familiar alternative, the great Phoenix Fire doing quadruple duty and super chatting $20 by way of the familiar alternative. Thank you very much, Phoenix, for the investment in white well-being and writing for the three of my favorite people in the cause. Thank you, Jared Jason, for having such a truly awe-inspiring guest on tonight for us all. Well, thank you very much for saying that, Phoenix. You are a wonderful person. Thank you for being here. I'll pass it back if either of you want to address the NWO Dispatcher's question, or we can move on with some more of this very intriguing interview.
Phil, did you have anything about that with the Focus Corporation or business? Or shall we?
Yeah, I mean, even charities here, and I forget the name now. There was a charity here that encouraged heritage, and it was a little bit too white, and they shut that down. And that was a registered charity. So I don't see much hope going through there, as Jason pointed out. I don't see much hope going through their streams because they can always close doors unfairly. They don't really need a reason. They don't, even if you play by the rules, they can generally close you down.
Yeah, at this stage, I think it just has to be more implicit or very small businesses, peer-to-peer. The very subculture that we're creating here. I understand the good intentions of the questioner.
Yeah.
Maybe we're just a few years out from something like that, but that's what
maybe we're a little jaded. Maybe he can prove us wrong.
I'd love to be. I think it's all in due time, though. But going on what we're speaking about, you mentioned reincarnation, so let's talk about death.
Yeah.
We've already been talking about it, but let's talk about death a little more. Cheery subject for everybody. But the peoples that you are describing, their relationship to death, and this is maybe a little foreshadowing of something we're going to talk about later in the show and dig deeper into. But the kind of mentality, the kind of meme pathogens that Jason describes, that's one of his terms, the mental viruses that get into people and cause them to be, so domineering over others and forcing their way on others. Sometimes I see that as coming out of a latent fear of death. And that these people you're explaining, they celebrated life, but they accepted the fact of death as a part of life and weren't as timid about death or scared about death. So if you could talk a little about that, and also how reincarnation plays into that, feeling that there's cycles and you're going to come back. We've heard these stories of the old Northern warriors were fearless because they knew that they would come back. It was almost, they had this tremendous courage in the fact that they knew that they would rise again in the next season. So they didn't hold on to their own lives in the same way perhaps that we do today.
Yeah, I mean, we have a great example of the admiration the other Europeans had for the Northern Europeans and the Gauls. In the statue of the Dying Gaul, which was replicated by the Romans, but was originally a Greek piece of artwork. And it shows a Gaul dying. He's stabbed, but the reason that they captured this in art was because they were amazed at the girl's fearlessness. He lay there waiting for his death. He didn't scream, he didn't cry, he didn't worry. He knew his duty had been done. And even with reincarnation, you spoke there, but you know, there's a fearlessness if you know you're coming back or believe you're coming back. Well, I do believe that there is evidence in some Norse texts and other texts that you can only come back through your own lines, through your own people. So doing everything to secure your line was very important for that reincarnation to take place. If your whole tribe got wiped out or whole peoples got wiped out, you probably weren't coming back in their beliefs. And there's also an immortality that goes beyond that. Interesting you said there about J-Storm and mind virus, and it's something that we can talk about a little bit later, but just as a little point here, you know, there's a question that has been interested me for a very long time now, and that is who is in control, the man or the idea? Right? Who really wields the power of your actions? Now, if you can create an ending to your existence, if you can rage into that battlefield like a great warrior and become a hero lifted up by the people. I mean, Tacitus talks that even the dead were carried off before the battle was over. That's how much they honored the dead. They even risked their lives to carry them away. If you can create a moment of greatness that will be remembered for thousands of years, that idea, the idea that bore that moment of greatness, lives on. And if that idea comes from you, you live. Because your ideas that spawn in your mind are now in the minds of your children and others far and wide. So there is an immortality that's not just in remembering the person, but in becoming part of that person. How many times do we see young children even today, and this is something that we could talk about later as well, with, you know, a pop star. They want to be they dress like the pop star. They act like the pop star. The idea of that person, which we know in our modern times is generally orchestrated by somebody behind. Most of these people are talentless people that are being told what to say, told what to do, given the songs to sing. So whoever's controlling the puppet master there is literally infecting our children with their ideas. And it is ultimately a battle of ideals. I mean, I've often said, what's the point if we all live? The white race carries on forever, but our soul is completely corrupted. That in our heads are just the ideas of our enemies. Do we really live? I mean, or are we already had a spiritual death?
Yes, very well said. And just on terms of your point with the reincarnation and the folk, this is just my guess, but would it be that the ones who were fighting the Romans, if they did, in fact, as you were saying before, kill their children, they knew that their folk were still back in Jutland. Yeah. And so that was kind of the pond to which they would return, so to speak.
I would believe so. I mean, it's impossible to fully know what they were thinking at that time, or the full implications of their spiritual belief. But even at the same time, right? So if they could only reincarnate, would they want to reincarnate as a slave? I mean, they may want to just return back. I mean, this is the Iron Age in Northern Europe. We don't fully know their beliefs. We've got no real writings, very few that come from Rome, and they're very vague. There's lots of speculation, and we could go into that, but we will never fully know. There's no absolutism on what they believed.
Right.
But like I say, there's even that context. And just to go back to the fear of death, because I kind of skimmed that a little bit there, because what you said was very important, that it does play in our lives today, and it plays with our children. And this goes back to the Kimberley. A man might go, I don't fear death. And he's a bold man. But if he goes to war and loses and then fears the fate of his children, he may decide not to go to war. He may decide by the fear of the implications of his actions, if they negatively affect his children, he probably won't do it. So armies in the past have always tried to make sure that they go, we're going to look after your children even if you die. Because a man won't willingly give himself to a cause if he feels that if he does that, he's going to stand out alone, he'll die, his children are going to suffer. So there's that aspect to the fear as well. It's not just the fear of your death, it's the fear of what will happen to your children. And the Kimberly conquer this completely by going, well, then they won't be in any bad position because we won't allow it. So they show ultimate, I mean, they took from the Romans in that moment everything. They damaged them, harmed them, and at the last moment when they were wanted slaves as some kind of payment for their victory, they took that too. They took everything, you know, and they wrote their epitaph in their blood, which we still see today. And it is a powerful one. That of literally no surrender.
It's extraordinary too, because as you're saying that the idea doesn't die, I took a step back and realized we're having this very conversation in the year we count as 2019, many, many, many years later. So,
and the Kimberly have infected me,
right,
with their idea. That's a positive,
right, and you're spreading this now through mass media. Yeah,
it was born in them.
I like what you said before about you live your own life or none at all. I've been critiqued a couple of times when I've been on people's streams, and I've talked about why are European people being targeted, and I talk about this freedom, this sense of freedom that we have very well developed in us. And it's a complex topic. I'm not saying that that's the one and only answer, but people I've seen in the comments sometimes say, oh, well, you white guys, I think you're thinking a little too highly of yourselves. But when you look at this spirit that you're describing here, and you look at the way that the globalist machine is turning, the way that the direction that's going in, it would be our spirit that would be what's left of it, would be the thing standing in the way. Again, we're going to talk a little more about that in a little bit, but I also want to segue into this because it flows from what we're talking about currently. And that is, you make a distinction in one of your videos, and I found this very interesting, about men and death, how men prove themselves by that courage of transcending the fear of death and or thinking about how you're going to be remembered when you die. It's something I can relate to. Versus the woman is defined by life in that her purpose becomes the nurturing and the rearing and the sustenance of her children. So very titillating bit that you gave in one of your videos. If you could just elaborate on that a little here.
Well, I mean, I spoke a little bit about it earlier with the idea that the living on. So we've covered that a little bit with the man, and obviously, you know, we have to. There's some realities that need to be addressed to fully understand what's going on there, and these realities are that if you had one white woman, one European woman, and 1,000 European men, your future is limited by the female. Whereas if you had one white male, one European man, 1,000 European women, you have a future. The other way around, you do not. So therefore, in a very natural setting, men are more expendable in war. And that is not to devalue them at all. They are needed. The best situation, this is why polygamy and multiple wives doesn't really work, because the best is to have one man to defend each family. That is the ultimate goal. But through haplogroups, we can see the way they've narrowed down and shrunk down. They've gone through bottlenecks. We can see that at certain points, a lot of men were lost in battle or whatever, but the people still lived on because there was enough women to birth children. So, I mean, you could even use it as a fractal, right? I'm a male, and I came from my mother. My mother, though, came from her mother and her mother. So each generation walked in the generation before. So that is the line that goes back. It is unbroken. One mother out of another mother, out of another mother, going back to the very first mother. And however you want to see that. The man tails off in the fractal. He will produce a child, but it won't come from him, out of him. He is essentially the defender of that line that goes back, that unbroken chain. I have a daughter. She will pass that on, and I must defend that. Once you've had your children, you must defend that line to keep it going, to keep this immortal line going. I mean, and you can actually view it as a fractal almost. If you have like two children and you have one girl and one boy, the boy spirals off to defend and the girl keeps continuing. I mean, but that's a practicality. This is why women are representative of life, because without them, there is no folk, there is no tribe. And without the male to protect them, there is no folk, there is no tribe. But the female is exceptionally important for life. And this is why the male must have a relationship with death, because he must be willing to give his life for that continuation. And if he at any moment decides his life is worth more than the continuation of his folk don't continue. And we see this today in a different way with people, and from women as well. They both choose to have careers. They both don't want children. They're told that, we get this mass propaganda in the media that, having children's going to shorten your lifespan, make you miserable. We get it daily. I mean, you've probably covered those subjects, ad nauseum, to be honest, because they're constantly there. They're telling us, and it's always a European couple when they say don't have children, and it's bad for the environment, so people are choosing to end themselves by the woman not embracing her role as a life giver, and the male not embracing his role as a life protector.
Yes, these subjects have been covered before, but you just put it in an extraordinary way. So thank you for that. We need to clip that. That was one of the best ways I've ever heard it described. Very moving. And Jason, if we don't have any super chats, I'm going to move into a big multi-tiered question that will form the meaty part of our discussion that we've all been leading up to. Any housekeeping first?
Yes, we do have some super chats from our splendid community of heroes. First one from Roy Danton, writing with $1.99. Thank you very much for that kind investment. Didn't add anything else to it but the investment. Thank you, Roy. We had Siege, super chatting with $5. Thank you very much. And writing, just wanted to remind people that you can share this channel with anyone and hopefully help them develop a sense of their people. It has no overtones of, quote, alt-right. It's simply a history channel. I've been sharing it everywhere, including with colleagues. Thank you very much for that investment, Siege, of $5 and the kind words. Syrup, doing double duty and with us again. Great to see you, Syrup. Hope all is well. Super chatting with £10 and writing, the lovely whites are the people of sailboats and farms. We are so attached to the earth and water that we do not fear our own demise. Whites know they will regrow like our seasonal crops. Thank you very much for that kind investment, Syrup, and the good words there. And just to remind everybody, you can super chat here on YouTube. You can also super chat on Entropy, where you can watch the stream as well. And by way of the familiar alternative, look down into the description and you will find the info there. And I will pass it back over to my good friend. And I will just add this. Yesterday, I actually said this during the 6.5 hours of streaming that I did yesterday, speaking directly to something Phil was saying there. And that is, yesterday I was saying the greatest creature on planet Earth is the woman, and the white woman, and that many things make her as spectacular as she is. Again, I'll say, as I said, that with the caveat yesterday, that not all women are good. There are awful women. There are good women, and we need to stop treating them as though they're all angels and feeding the vanity and etc. Be good to the good women and reject the bad women. That's how we need to behave, the same way as we do with our men. But ultimately, what it comes down to, what makes the white woman better than every other being on planet Earth, is that she is the only creature that can give birth to the white man, the only one. And it is the white man who has given us Western civilization more so than anything else and anyone else on planet Earth. And for that, we are eternally grateful. It is in the womb of the white woman that the blessing to us all is birthed. So I'll pass it back to my friend and colleague, and we will proceed with this fantastic interview.
Well, I just want to add for a minute, Jason. Remember when we did the spring incantation video a couple of months ago, and we spoke about the tribes? That was the way that we poetically put it in that video. It reminds me of some of the things that Phil is saying. And one of the lines that we said in that video was, what would our ancestors want for us? Would they want the fighting between the men and the women? I'm listening to you, I'm listening to Phil, and I'm seeing some of the things in the chat, and I'm just filled with this feeling of healing, like something's being mended back together in all of us, because we've all been affected in some way or another by these many ways, sometimes very minute, that we're fractured. There's fractures within us, and there's fractures between us that people try to create.
Mhm.
So I thank you for saying that. I see Phil is here, and we're now ready for the next part of this interview. And we're going to get into some very interesting questions that Phil's material has piqued our curiosity. Jason and I are curious guys.
Mhm.
So we're going to start with this. Your videos talk a lot about the clash between the Roman Empire and peoples of the North, as we were talking about earlier. And if you're of Southern European descent, don't fret. We're going to address that aspect as well. And I have blood from all over Europe myself. But what is it that you feel drove the Romans in the later part in their empire to have that mentality of creating a desert everywhere and calling it peace? That unfettered, we talked to Laura Lee last week about Lord of the Rings and evil, and she said that the vocatio of the men of the West, of the white man, is to learn how to use his power, but that everything comes in balance. Do you have any thoughts on what it is that, and we see this, I'm not saying it was only Rome, obviously there's many examples of this all over the world, but it was something that would seem to be coming up from other cultures, other parts of the world that maybe got into the Roman mind, that unfettered domination and unfettered growth.
Yes. It's a big question. I've been meaning to address it in actually a video as well, based on a civilization, I was going to call it, and just to talk about that a little bit. But yeah, I'm happy to address it here, and I think it's a good opportunity to, because I think sometimes people can get quite offended sometimes slowly that I'm maybe dissing the Southern Europeans, and I'm not at all. If I were to do that, I would be attacking myself, because the British Empire is really the true-born child of Rome in many ways. But to get to your question there about where this idea comes from, it's quite a big one, and we need to go right back to start with. And I think it's best that we go right back and try and work from there, because it will make more sense. It's clear from even archaeological digs very early on, and our last example of this was a king called Domaldi. He was a king of Sweden. Now I probably butchered the name there, and I do apologize for that. But he sacrificed himself for his folk. Now this is really a key important point here. Even though he was leader and he controlled all the power, he had all the say in what happened there, and he could have been corrupted, he put his folk, because of bad harvests, etc., above himself. And he willingly sacrificed himself to the gods and goddesses. There is also evidence of this going back nearly 8,000 years in bog burials, where they're deliberate sacrifices. There are actually two types of sacrifice that I've identified, that is of king or nobility, and of children, but the children are generally maimed or ill in such a way that their lives would have been living hell. So in that instance, it almost looks like they're giving back to the gods and goddesses, because they're unable to assist their child. But that's another subject to what we're talking about. The idea that these kings would put themselves second. Now, that is a leader. That is what we call a leader. A leader, as Jason has mentioned a few times already on the show, that he wishes to put himself in between the bullet, in between the child and the gun, right? The bullet that's coming for the child. That is a sacrifice. That's a leader aspect. A leader must be shown to give himself over to any calling that threatens his people. And over time, and as you rightly say, through Rome, we come through Greece and we come through Rome, there was a corrupting element that we can trace from east to west, specifically the Middle East, where we have these so-called high civilizations, and we can start to see a corruption occur. And as this corruption occurs, and this is not to say that it was not prevalent in some aspects, there is human nature In the Iron Age, there was definitely a nobility, but it was centered around a certain different thing. But when a nobility, that is when you decide that through birth, I am more important than you, Jared. Say I am of a higher birth. I am more important than you through birth, not by deed, but by birth. That is the first corruption. Because no matter how powerful the mighty lion, who's the head of the pride, his children, the little lion cubs get no easier way in life. Nature does not go, your father was the greatest lion there ever was. He had the biggest pride and the most lands. That child does not get an easy ride. He must go into that world from the beginning and fight for his own. And thus, nature secures greatness. When I decide that my birth makes me better than you for no other reason than my birth alone, then corruption falls. I mean, we can example this in some ways just by saying, we all know great sports personalities, etc., etc. Do you know their fathers' names? Probably not, because their fathers, in most cases, were not great sportsmen. Their children generally aren't great sportsmen. There are exceptions to this, but the exceptions prove the rule. That we don't have just generations and generations of great sports players in any particular field. So we must, the genetic material of a people, the greatness of the genetic material of people is in its tribe, and allowing those people the ability to go up in that based on ability is important. And when you decide, like I say, that your birthright just gives you importance, that is a problem, and that is the first corruption. And then with these Eastern ideas of money, because obviously in the North we had a very different look at money. We can talk about that later if you'd like. But with these ideas of money and greed and power and total domination over nature, which the Roman Empire embodied, especially in its latter half, which the Cimbrian War was actually a turning point for that. But there's an example I always like to use to show the difference between the northern tribes and Rome at this point in time. If you come to Britain, and we've got a beautiful there's archaeology everywhere in the UK. Every field, well, not every field, but probably every field if you dug down deep enough. But you can drive through the countryside, or if you're on a train, I take a lot of trains, and you can go through and you can see hill forts just standing there. These hill forts are beautifully crafted into the land. If anybody hasn't seen them, they're not square. They go with the natural contours, but it's man and nature in harmony. Whereas the Roman forts came in and they flatten the ground to make a big flat, and then they build this big imposing square on it. That's domination over land, nature. And the best way to kind of see this mindset is that you look at everything as something to be conquered rather than to be in harmony with. Mm-hmm. And this also applies to people. And this is why Romans there were slaves in the north, but even Tacitus mentions that the Germanic tribes weren't very good at slavery because they didn't fully understand it, according to him, because they just saw slavery as tax. Whereas in Rome, if I was the slave of a Roman, I would be his property. He could just chop my head off one day, and there would be no punishment for that, because I was literally an object in Roman law as a slave. Whereas in Germanic law, it was more you had to pay him X amount of wheat a year, which what we do today, where you could argue, by ancient Germanic standards, we're all slaves. But yeah.
Well, continuing on that and what I hinted at before, because we're going to be turning this wheel a few times, this whole idea about this universal domination, subservient mindset, how it is not germane, especially to us European peoples. But I'm sure there are a lot of people today, currently of Southern European descent, and back then as well, who did bear the marks of our people, of course, mm-hmm. and their love of freedom. We speak about this often here. I've said at many points how wonderful it's been to read the works of Ricardo Duchesne and how he traces these traits through all of our people wonderfully, in a very academic way, by the way. So what's the wise way to parse this so that it doesn't become something where we want to be honest about these historical facts, and we want to be honest about these instincts, and we want to be honest about the specific, as Jason likes to say, I love this, the hues, the different hues of the European peoples, because there's a lot of, as we know, true diversity within the European peoples.
Yes.
But let's say this, just as you can't blame the current EU, and we're going to relate some of this to the EU as we develop this conversation. You can't blame the current EU and just say that it's some sickness of Northern Europeans. It's like in Northern European DNA, because obviously the EU is everything, but let's face it, the euro is based on the Deutschmark, the headquarters, it's headquartered in Belgium. It has more of a Northern European character of how it began. The European economy, Northern European economy is really the base of it. So what would you say to someone who was challenging you on this to kind of reset the balance? Just like we can't blame the current EU on Northern Europeans, we can't just paint with too broad a brush and say that all peoples of Southern European descent are somehow implicated in this Roman Empire, this mind virus that you're describing, so much as there are probably a lot of them, and we're hopefully going to be talking to someone soon, by the way, little teaser, that we'll be able to speak more about old folkish practices in Southern Europe. We're trying to get a guest about that. I'm sure they had very similar desire for freedom. It's just that this empire was kind of superimposed on top of it.
Well, the empire didn't start off as bad. I mean, it slowly became more corruptible as it gained more power. I mean, it sought first to protect itself. I mean, there were many deals done with neighboring tribes that the Romans tell us about, where they were trying to just secure peace. It was, like we mentioned earlier, it was a hostile world. So securing peace and war, but they became very good at war, and that's not a problem either. It is when they started to covet not land, because land is the ultimate. The idea of selling land is, in the past, would have seemed absolutely absurd. Just take on it. You couldn't sell land. Land literally limits the amount of people you can have. It limits the size of your tribe, so for food and living. But when Rome started conquering, and this was not the average Roman, by the way, just as in the British Empire, the height of the British Empire, the common man from the British Isles was at his poorest. It was by his blood that it was built, and by his tears that it was suffered. And I'm sure there was very little difference between the common Roman, who, well, even at the Cimbrian War, I mentioned this earlier, one of the reasons they wouldn't give them land is because there was already massive debates in the Senate where certain senators were trying to fight for the rights of the common Roman citizen to have land, the common Roman plebeian class to have land. They were executed and murdered by the power top. We see the corruption. People have got a lot of power. They don't want to share it. They're happy with their power, and they want to maintain that power. And when Rome started to conquer, not in the name of land for its own people, but to conquer both land and man, it started to become an empire of greed. This is where we get and turns it makes a desert and calls it a peace. It means it would destroy you if, in one way or another, and then say, look, we've brought peace to this realm. We see similar things happening with in modern warfare, right? They go there, they bomb the crap out of it. I mean, look at Libya, for an example, right? Libya got destroyed, took down, annihilated, and then we went, hey, look, we freed them. It's the very same tactic of create a desert and call it a peace. And they rifled the deep. This was all from a Roman writer, is what we're talking about. This is quoted from Tacitus, who was a Roman writer, a very interesting Roman writer, one of my favorites. And so, is it, just to go back to the question, is it to blame of? Well, then I'm just to blame as the British Empire for, say, like you said, and we're to blame for. There is a corrupting element that gets into our elite, and through things we were talking about earlier, like fear of death and fear of security, or if I'm going to lose my job if I speak up, or I'm going to do this, we keep quiet and we back down, and we allow these people because they seem all powerful to us, and they would have back then, and even more so, their power could have been dealt much more brutally back then. vagabonds, as they were called in British society in the Middle Ages, they could just lock you up in stocks for being a vagabond. A vagabond was just somebody that they considered homeless and useless. You know, there was the law was not really to protect everybody; it was to protect an elite, because that's what they want to do, and we've seen it now in its manifestations of how far it will go. But in the modern age, they want to keep the pretense of some kind of civility, whereas in the past, they didn't really care to do that. They'd beat you down with sticks if you got out of hand. And the Romans invented a very good idea, the bread and circuses. And we still see that today. We call it McDonald's and a sports ball, you know, but it's the same thing, right?
Yeah, it seems like it's when you're trying to make one thing out of too many things. Empire, universalism. And we're going to talk a little more about empire later. I know it's not, there's two sides to it, but that seems
I'll ramble, so try and keep me on track and I'll be good.
No. No, it is all good stuff. I have to watch myself with that, trust me. It's interesting. I brought up this book last week, and I'll mention it again. And when I mention things in history, of course, I understand we're learning and piecing things back together. I am not some grand student of history. So someone might email me or make a comment and say, hey, but what about this side that gives a totally different example of what I'm about to say. So I'm just explaining one thing from one author. But I'm reading this book, a couple of things I'm reading right now, but I'm reading this book, The Real Middle Earth by Brian Bates. I mentioned it last week. And he's talking about Anglo-Saxon England. And when they discovered the Roman ruins, they stayed away from them. They didn't build their towns on the Roman ruins in England. He draws this very interesting parallel between the ancient conception of a dragon and how the dragon was actually, it wasn't just this purely malevolent evil force. There were kind of two sides to it. All of this myth about disturbing the dragon was you were disturbing the order. It was kind of like the anima of that society. And a lot of these disturbing the dragon stories start with someone unwittingly taking something from the dragon's treasure. There's an order disturbed, and then the dragon goes and wreaks havoc and blows away the town because something was set out of balance. And so when the Anglo-Saxons saw the Roman ruins, according to this author, they did not live in them because they saw a civilization, something had gone wrong, and the world had set things back to rights because that civilization retracted, left that island, and was now a dead civilization there. So they avoided the Roman ruins. And on a personal level, I was very struck by this when I read this, because I myself have been to Bath, England, and maybe this was the Northern European genes in me. Many people say they have wonderful holidays at Bath. You know, it's beautiful when you look at it. I loved the surrounding countryside. I got a very strange vibe, for lack of a better word, in Bath. Something was just off about it to me. So I don't know if that was a little race memory, but apparently these Northern European tribes, the Anglo-Saxons, did not hang around. They built their towns away from the Roman ruins because they felt like these guys had done something to get out of the balance with nature, out of harmony with nature.
Yeah, but there's a couple of points there I can address. Firstly, I would agree with that writer that they did not live in, and I think I know some. I don't know who would be disagreeing with that. I think it's pretty commonly accepted that they didn't. I mean, even there was a TV program.
Anytime I say anything historical, somebody emails me or comments and says, "No, but what about this?" So I'm just a student.
We all are. I am too. I am too. Do I know everything? Of course I don't. Does anybody know everything of our past? Of course they don't. And there's so many angles that you could, I mean, we're all lenses and we look at it in our own way through our own blood. So we're always going to take different elements from any given story. But yeah, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the Anglo-Saxons didn't want anything to do with them. Like I say, there's even some archaeological digs where they've shown that they put cattle in wealthy villas. The Anglo-Saxons, they use them as cattle sheds as opposed to living them, while they made their own houses somewhere else. So they had no reverence for them all. In fact, in London, we know Anglo-Saxons lived there, but we can't find where they lived because they didn't live in the Roman ruins. They moved away from there, but nobody's fully found out where the Anglo-Saxons actually had their settlement there. But in archaeology, Anglo-Saxons are very hard to find because they have limited pottery. They prefer to use wooden bowls, but they do have some pottery, but it's rarer. They leave very little trace in the landscape. They're much more in tune with nature than Rome. And now, speaking of the dragons, that's interesting. I mean, I haven't read that book, but I would agree with him. Dragons are in my opinion, it's like a snake, a serpent. You see those, and if you look at Northern European dragons, they're the worms, rims. They're serpent-like, and that's in my own personal studies. Now, I'm not talking of any book. I'm not talking of anybody's ideas. In my own personal studies, I've come to understand this as a life force. And it is the life force, and then the man is meant to master over it. So it's it can be used for good or bad. It leads to the corruption of the leader. When he gets too much and he cannot control it, the life force takes over this energy and leads him to become selfish and to see himself as more important than folk. Used wisely by, say, a hero, he can use that to rage in battle and defend his folk. It could even relate to, if people wanted to try and think of it in some ways like kind of a chakra system, but there's a primal force, a primal energy that needs taming by the man. And if he doesn't tame it, it will take control of him, and he will become greedy, lustful, egotistical. If he tames it and keeps it, it become a powerful example of duty and power. So that's just speaking of my personal opinions on that dragon idea, which he seems to share, like you say, because in his example, he's saying stealing stuff. So if you're using it in the wrong way, i.e. stealing some of its power for the wrong purposes, stealing its treasure, it's going to wreak havoc in your society, which it did with Rome. Rome collapsed partly because of itself, but it should not be taken away that the Germanic tribes did come down and finish them off. But
what you're saying about power and wielding it correctly dovetails perfectly with what we discussed with a woman, Laura Lee Scaife, last week about Lord of the Rings. I would love to have you two on at the same time sometime in the future. But before we continue, anything about just the general Roman legacy to draw on the positives? We know that they gave us a lot with architecture and engineering. We don't have to belabor the point if you don't have anything to say, but I do want to give you the room to also talk about the positive aspects of their cultural legacy. They are part of our story as European peoples, of course.
Well, they showed us something in ourselves. In this, with the dominance came mass organization. So the European skills were put to an industrial level, essentially. They were shown for what they could do. So our duty was put to organization, our love put to creation of architecture and artwork. Our wish to strive beyond our current limitations was put into invention, so it kind of hyper focused some of these talents and put them on a mass scale, whereas before they were done more subtly, I would assume, and more locally. So a great artist, but like I say, we were ancient Britons were no idiots or Luddites. If you look at the talks of the Iceni, or the Iceni, as most people say it, they're masterfully crafted. And again, we have the Anglo-Saxons moving in that reject wholesale. The whole of Roman society was rejected wholesale. The market town was a reinvention. Although the market town existed in Roman Empire, it didn't exist for hundreds of years in English society after the Roman fall. But look at the artifacts from Sutton Hoo. These artifacts are not created by a barbaric society. Somebody has got that does that job as a profession, and not just a profession, at such a level of skill. Even the greatest artisans today would struggle to make them. These are the level we're talking about of expertise. And you can only have, so although the Romans called them barbarians, they could not be barbarians because you can only have a high culture to be able to have somebody be able to dedicate so much time and effort and skill and generational learning to create such masterpieces of art. But like I say, Rome showed us it on a grand scale. It took that talk and that piece of jewelry and then turned it into architecture. It made the vision grander. So because of the duty and the organizational skills, because it was an empire, so it had vast amounts of money. The same can be said for Christianity in the Middle Ages. Through its vast wealth, it created these massive temples to their gods, to their god. And because so they go, oh, and this is sometimes an example we see again. They go, they go, look at you pagans, you didn't create, because we didn't have that mass wealth, because we didn't organize our societies like that. But if you do, you can show the Europeans' creativity to its height.
Very
so that
well.
would be an argument for it. Sorry.
No, very, very well said. I'm going to jump in briefly with some super chats, and we'll keep going with this great conversation. I want to read first. We have a message from European Truth writing, "Hail, brothers! I'm busy debating our enemies on Facebook, and I'm absolutely steamrolling them with ease. Thanks to No White Guilt. They're left speechless, stumped, tarred, and feathered. Very empowering. Very empowering. Thank you very much for sharing your testimony and success of the vernacular and the dialectics that we teach here in Going Free. And I ask you all, when you have similar successes, either steamrolling the anti-whites, or more importantly, which is really the purpose, is to make sure that we bring more people into the cause for white well-being, that you go out there with this. We had a message just a couple days ago. I had a message just a couple days ago of a guy that has brought his whole family into white well-being, whereas none of the arguments worked on them before. He began using this dialectic and the lexicon, and he has brought them all over in love for white well-being. This is something that the anti-whites are absolutely terrified of. They're smartest members of the anti-white elites. They look at this and they are terrified. This I can tell you. We also, and this is very important to point out because it is absolutely swells my heart with pride and gratitude. Laura writing that just since the beginning of the show today and mentioning of Nat Connect and asking people to not feel like you're alone, to reach out and make contact with someone. There's someone just like you. Just as yesterday, Laura is saying the messages are pouring in for Nat Connect, and that is a true blessing. Thank you all for doing that work, and thank you all who are reaching out to participate and make friends by way of this endeavor that Laura and Way of the World have conducted. God bless the both of you for your efforts. Now we have a super chat from Aries, super chatting with 2 euros. Opinion on Kai Moros. He's a great nationalist. Well, we'll see. I don't know who that is. We'll see if my colleagues have an opinion once we get finished here and move on. We also have NWO Dispatcher back again with another $5 investment. Thank you as well. 5 months is when a fetus lungs form. Could surgically remove septuplets and liberate her from birthing risk and get skilled at bringing preemies to full term. I guess the idea there is each white woman with our current technology, we could have them produce more than what is currently possible of children each time by being able to extract them and then increase our science and ability to bring preemies to the full term growth. Thank you for the $5 investment and sharing that idea. And over on Entropy, Roy Danton super chatting with $10. Thank you very much. I think I might put up a question over there for folks to answer. If anybody has an idea for a question that I could put up for people to give their opinions on, please tag me and let me know a good one. We'll see if we can get an opinion on a poll. In writing, Roy writes, it wasn't the biggest problem with the Roman Empire that they conquered so many non-white peoples and mixed with them, so their bloodline deteriorated. Those questions from those super chats to the both of you, and we will move forward and collect the future super chats. I think we've already had 2 more come in, and we will read those a bit later.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me, Phil.
Yeah. Anyone you want me to particularly answer there?
Well, I think particularly about the Roman Empire becoming a little too all-encompassing, shall we say.
Well, that is the ultimate, like I say, when the corruption sets in and it's just about power, you don't care who you're ruling. Because, like I say, it's not about conquering the land for your people to settle. It's about conquering the land and the people so they pay you taxes or tribute. And when you get to that situation, of course, I mean, this is my problem with empire. Empire people, for all of the great things, like we said earlier, like the architecture, what empire does is it builds itself, its greatness, off the back of blood, and then betrays it in its ultimate conclusion. And every empire has done this. Every empire has betrayed blood in the seek of more power and more domination, because to make them feel better, you have to let some of their leaders into your, marrying between tribal groups to gain power and gain trust, because nobody likes to be ruled by somebody that's not of their own blood. And that's just a fact. So they end up mixing at the high levels, and then they mix at the low levels.
I'll just jump in really quickly and say that in Prometheus Rising, as I've mentioned before, the book is written to be used the same way math is used for physics. Prometheus Rising is meant to be used to interpretate our social sphere. And there is something in Prometheus Rising called the Aedamonox. It speaks directly to what happens when groups of our brothers and sisters, white people, they end up going out, conquering, and then mixing with the local population, using them initially to gain many strong hands for the implementation of their brilliant ideas, architecture, etc., and then mixing with them very slowly, of course, at first. And the more the mixing takes place, the more they become like the people that they have conquered. And eventually we have what we have is the case all around the world that we see again and again. And the science continues to come out, ladies and gentlemen. We see the genetics of Europeans found in the skulls of the leaders of the Central South American rulers. We see the blonde-haired mummies showing up in China. We see in fact, it was just recently, the strawberry blonde hair of, what was it, the grandmother of King Tut. And what do we see in all of these cases? We see that there was this boom of civilization, and then after a time, almost everything is forgotten, and there isn't any white people left. And particularly when we look at Egypt, not making any claims here, of course, about what is the official story about what took place with Egypt, because on YouTube, we're not allowed to make any historical claim that contradicts the official narrative, and so we're not doing that here. But we see what happened there, that eventually the white race had to go back down to Egypt and discover the language and how to read that language again, something that had been lost for a great period of time. Nobody that had lived there could recall. And in fact, genetically, this was just in the news the other day, that the genetic samples they have from some of the earliest pharaohs, people can look this up. In fact, even though this is a fact and it was just released in the news the other day, I'm hesitant to even say, because we know that anything that contradicts with the anti-white narrative is immediately struck down by the anti-whites. Facts are what they refer to as hate facts when they don't conform to the anti-white narrative. But you can look up now and see what scientists are saying about the genetics of the earliest pharaohs and what group of people they are most like, and the group of people that they are nothing like. And I think you will be surprised to find what they have uncovered. But I'll pass it back now to my colleague and great guest.
I'm a strawberry blonde pharaoh, don't you know?
Yes, indeed, you are, my friend.
Hey, ladies. All right, I'm going to read this next question instead of trying to summarize it, which sometimes takes me longer. I'm just going to read it. So, we understand the European desire for natural life close to the land, the Tolkien-esque Shire vision we've been talking about. But we also have the realities of a hyper-connected, hyper-technologized, if that's a word, world, where there's a danger in becoming too isolationist, creating power vacuums, forfeiting resources. For example, the Chinese getting all the minerals and building tech, etc. So how do Western peoples manage the need for some kind of global assertion of power and at least showing our interests without it becoming the kind of destructive empire we loathe and that you have so well articulated for us already, Phil?
Well, that's the big question, really. And that's what we've seemingly failed to do for the last few thousand years, getting that balance right. So I'm not sure if I'm qualified to answer it in full. But yeah, first of all, in the situation we are at the moment, it is just about securing where we are. We've got to go with what we've got at the moment, and that is this skeleton of an empire that we have. But the truth is, if we fall, if we fail, and as Jason put earlier, we're not hateful of other peoples, not at all. But if we fall, the world is only going to get worse. And if we could convey that to the other peoples of the world, that it's actually we're the most people could accuse me of all sorts of things for saying this, but I don't see any people that are more compassionate than us. When I see trailers out there trying to stop whaling, whether you agree with them or not, it's white people. When I see people trying to stop animal testing, it's Europeans. When I see people trying to save the environment, it's Europeans. When I see people going to any country all around the world to feed poor and starving anything, whether it be animals or other people, it's Europeans. We are by far the most sympathetic, It's in our nature, it's in our DNA, and this is one of the reasons earlier that I didn't mention that empire has failed, because it's kind of, especially with the Northern European, but all Europeans to a point, it's not in our nature to have slaves. I mean, even in America where they had slavery, people, before it was banned to release your slaves, Americans were just releasing their slaves. Okay. And they would have actually the slavery would have ended before it officially ended, by the rate of release that the American population was releasing them at. It doesn't bode well. And when something doesn't bode well, it actually creates a weakness in us because we feel bad. And we're seeing the ultimate use of that now. When they get us to do something that we feel bad about. So when we have slaves, we don't want to have slaves. We don't want to domineer over somebody. When they make us feel bad about it, they can use it as leverage over us, which is what they're doing today. So we have to avoid these pitfalls that we've had in the past, because if we don't, it would just be used as leverage against us. But the actual ultimate answer to that question, I can't fully say, because, like I say, that would be a big philosophical project. But we've definitely got to try, and this is our time. And this is something we have to remember. It's and whoever's got an idea. I see people argue about ideas all the time, and they want to just. But as I've grown, as I'm maturing in life, I've decided, you know what? Let the dogs fight, rather than keep holding them back and barking at each other. Let them fight. Let's go with nature. That's how nature works. If you've got the best idea, show me that it's the best idea. But anyway, I went a bit off a tangent there. And I'm not sure if Jason wanted to add something there, because
we have to, on this show tonight, figure out the plan for the perfect balance going forward. Now, as Jason often says, it's not a plan, because life is in a state of flux and things change. Mm-hmm. I think that there's something to be said of what we're doing now in reawakening of people's connection to who they are. Yes. And making sure that our societies, from every level, from the family unit all the way up to whatever the largest sovereign container is, we live in a world primarily of nation states, but these are just all nested layers of different levels of sovereignty that are supposed to flow one into the other and interact with each other. If they're all aligned in the fact that the people and the health of the people is the first and last word, and that all of the different strata of society have that in mind, and there are somehow, both legally but also customarily, in the understandings of how people live their lives, and understanding that the highest value is to have that connection and have that service, and the lowest value is to betray it, then perhaps we could better avoid the temptations. There's always going to be, like you said, human nature, but the better avoid the pitfalls of what happens, these cycles, unless they're just inevitable, these cycles of elites, as you said, building an empire on the blood, but then betraying that very blood.
Yeah,
How often do we see that?
It happens time and again. And I mean, There are ways we can do it. Like I say, the first point of call is to stop the rot. We have to stop that, because at the moment people become. It's not just leaders now, or some corrupt leader like Nero or something. It's people on every level are becoming exceptionally selfish, exceptionally me. They only do things that directly benefit them directly. They won't go out of their way to help, and when they do, we see, as I said, that leverage is used of guilt. So they end up helping some poor African in a country far away because they do it for image. It's still ego based. And that's the sad thing. It's all about image at the moment because everybody wants to be seen as something good. We need to stop that. We need to start to remember that there is something beyond us. And that is part of what Mimir's Brunnr is about, because I do believe personally that it is through our ancient or in reverence to our ancient beliefs. And one of the key factors of that is, ancestral worship. And through that, I've grown much wiser just by observing them and really trying to, as Jay said before, trying to get into their minds and really trying to understand what drove them and what beauty they saw, even in that savage world that we look back on and escaped us. And so I would say that's where we start. And as for different nations and different peoples, in the past we had a thing called confederations. The Anglo-Saxon invasion actually was a confederation of northern groups. And what we need to do is, rather than just drown, some people have put forward the idea that Europe should just merge into kind of one conglomerate, like an EU, but not a bad one, right? We get this EU, but for European interests. Whereas my idea would be that would be a sad thing to destroy all these different cultures and different beauties of Europe. So what we need to do is join together with a goal of protecting and preserving ourselves, but maintain our own borders, but a united force against the world. But sadly for this, and this is why a lot of this becomes hypothetical, before this, we need to each and every one of us needs to take back our own countries. And we have to do that. And we've seen in history, without mentioning any names, what happens when one country takes back and the others don't. One country freeing itself is not going to do it. We need to do it together. And this is why we do have to interact with people from different countries in Europe and America. America is a powerful force. It's got a very, because of its birth, it's attracted a lot of pioneering genetics, etc. It's got a very strong spirit, and that needs to be utilized. But Europe's a much older nation, so they're more jaded sometimes, I suppose, from the Americans' point of view. And I've lived in America briefly, and I know there is quite a difference, but you can still see that spirit there. The European spirit is still.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that. So as a quick sub question, anything you'd like to highlight about that? Observations from living in America?
There is a difference. Americans. Well, I say it, but to be honest,
first, it's a damn big country. Would you mind saying?
I live in California, Northern California.
Oh, that I think that's a different country from where Jason and I live. But go ahead.
Yeah, among the big redwoods. Yeah, there was a very hippie type culture up there. But well, I noticed the main difference is Americans were very optimistic. Like in England anyway, there's kind of like a humor of being depressed. So, we moan about everything. We do it semi-jokingly, but we like to moan. Whereas in America, I saw sometimes an over-the-top hyper excitability, like a hyper hopefulness, which was very different to what I saw. Like I remember when I went back, I got a job and I was just doing some temporary work. So I just went into this factory in England. And it was quite a contrast because in England and in the factory, imagine I'm in a factory in the middle of the Black Country, which is the heart of the industry. We've got lots of factories, it's all iron. And everybody's just miserable. And it was such a head turn because in America, it was like everybody was, well, where I was in America, everybody was like hyper happy, like they were on drugs. And then I went to somewhere like where everyone's hyper miserable.
If you were in the Rust Belt, among the people who are still employed there, and there's a lot of unemployment among factory workers, I don't think that you would get that buoyancy that you got in Northern California.
In Northern California, a lot of them were desperately poor. there was a lot of poverty up there, a lot more than I thought I would see, actually. A lot of homelessness, especially in Northern California. Apparently, I was told when I was living there that it was because the weather was so favorable that a lot of homeless people from around the country end up there because, you know, you don't want to be sleeping in 2 foot of snow. You know what I'm saying? But it was a strange experience because you see America on the TV as this big, powerful, this big industry, media, and all this, and then you see its underbelly a little bit when you're driving through the cities. You see it's built quite a lot on heavy poverty, and you know, a lot of white people that have succumbed to drug abuse, etc. And you know, I'm sure you agree with me. A lot of this drug abuse is down to self-hatred. This is down to them being cut off from their true history. Then being told, I mean, the suicide rates among Europeans is so high. And when you look at there being, even if it's done cryptically, they're constantly being told that they're pieces of, you know, crap, that they don't belong, that they're to blame for everything. And that's one of the reasons Mimir is there, to show people like Jason was talking about at the beginning of the show. No, you have got value, and your value, if you want to know how valuable you are, every single aspect of suffering, every struggle your ancestors did was for you. You're the ultimate result of that. You can't give up. You can't fall down. It's not your place. There's 1,000, 10,000 people's lives, struggles, and deeds that rely on your success. This is not a time, and we need to tell people that in a positive way, of course, because I can only see the drug abuse and the poverty, especially with heroin amongst the white community, which is a dropout drug. It's a shut me down, turn me off. I don't want to see the world no more.
Yes.
I directly put the blame of that onto the anti-whites for teaching these children from school. I mean, if you speak to people that are going to college and universities in these countries, they're literally told to hate themselves. And there's no way they can get any other feeling than shame and worthlessness from that kind of experience.
Precisely, and very, very well said. That is exactly what's taking place, and that is exactly what Way of the World and Laura are helping to ameliorate these people's suffering. This, folks, is what in Going Free I refer to as white noir. This is the sickness, the physical, mental, and spiritual sickness that grips us as a people, severely lifting your potential in all ways, mental, physical, and spiritual, by these beliefs that you are infected with from the very earliest ages in your life. And as a result of that deep infection, as the memories pile on top, those infections gain greater and greater control over your identity. This is why the process of going free is a lifelong process. If it were not even considering any new MPs, just dealing with the ones you currently have is a lifelong process. And the promise there is that the freer you go, you never go completely free, but the freer you go of these infections, these MPs, the more access you have to the potential that is within you. And the potential, ladies and gentlemen, that wells in every single one of us as members of Western Kind is the potential seen in our greatest works by our greatest masters in every field imaginable. And so before we move on any further, as we are coming down, I think, to the final 15 minutes of the show. And so it's been a stellar show. We're going to have you back, Phil, as has been the case, Jared, with so many of our guests. We start to dig in and the tap gets wide open. Things are really flowing. And then, of course, the 2 hours fly by as though they've been 2 minutes. But we have 2 super chats that I want to be sure to read. We also have a poll over on Entropy asking folks if they have participated in any type of animal rescue, and everyone is saying yes so far. You too, if you don't want to head over to Entropy, can participate in that poll by writing your message right into the YouTube chat. We have a super chat from Randomness 83XX, $1.99. Thank you very much for the kind super chat, and writing quite simply and profoundly, "Tomorrow is ours." Beautifully written. Thank you very much for that investment. And we have Dave the Impaler writing with $5. Thank you very much for the kind investment in white well-being and suggesting an excellent book. He writes that covers many of the topics discussed today is The Secret of the She-Bear, written by Marie Cachet, the wife of Varg. Thank you very much for the investment and the recommendation, Dave. And Jared, I will turn it back over to you, or Phil, if you have something to say about the super chats or anything I just said.
Phil, anything, or shall I continue?
No, you continue. Sorry. I had myself on mute then. I forgot to unmute.
No, quite all right. Quite all right. Well, given what we've been discussing, and given what you've studied and shared in your videos, do you have a different frame of what the term civilization means? We've discussed how the Greco-Roman legacy has given us wonderful things, but sometimes I think too much our idea in academic circles, and this has a long precedent with the histories of who the elites are and things in your case in England, like the Norman conquest, even going that far back, is the classical world. Now that's a big thread in our story, but there's other layers to it. And for the common person, the way that they live their lives, because we were just touching on this idea of empire and the decisions of the elites, but for the way most of us live our lives, the kind of lifestyle that you indicate in your videos, again, just as a quick thumbnail, I'll call it the Shire thing, the Tolkien thing, living close to the land in harmony with nature. Why is that thought of as less civilized? What do we have to learn from the quote unquote barbarians? We know they're not barbarians, and I think it's ridiculous to keep using that term. But how has this reshaped your idea of what civilization is, and maybe what I should say, like what the good life is and what is natural to our people?
Well, I think what we can learn first of all is balance. Civilization generally comes up and begins to dominate the land. We see squares. The squares are more they're easier to fit things in if you're building squares, but I suppose if you built differently, it would be different. But we see the square, and this relates to the squaring of the circle, masculine, the balance between masculine and feminine powers. I mean, we could go into this in a lot of areas, but balance is the key. We need to see the land as not something to just be robbed or raped. The land is generally seen as feminine. In many countries, we call Mother England. Even the Romans called Rome by a female, addressed it as female. So when we deal with the land in any way, whatever we put onto it, it must accentuate her beauty and both be serving of us and her. And I think that would be the key. And obviously, we live in a different age. We're not going to go around and building round houses like Iron Age Britain, etc. But we can take that philosophy of union, and this harks back to the idea of the king marrying the land. We get in Celtic myth, we get Culhwch who marries Olwyn, which is kind of Mother Earth. Well, he's marrying his part of Earth. It's a myth to say that he's a king marrying the land. We get it with Niall of the Nine Hostages, where he kisses the old hag and she turns into a beautiful woman. So what he's saying there is the land was ravaged, the land was indeed, but his love for that land made it bloom once again and become a beautiful maiden. And if we take back that idea that we are in a union with the land, that she is our bride, and this is the difference between what I believe Rome did. Rome got corrupted and then started to essentially enslave her and rape her. And once you take that away, so I think it's about a union of land and man. And when we build that harmony, and the beautiful thing is we have a lot of modern technology. It's not a negative in this respect. We have some of the greatest minds on the planet that if we put their efforts to understanding this unity, understanding this balance better, we could do something with that. We know at the moment it's all driven for capital, and if they can't make money off it, it rarely sees a light of day. But if we put those minds not for just making money purposes, but for true union, something beyond ourselves, and I think this would help as a society anyway, to have a dream beyond ourselves. I mean, many of the great pieces of architecture across Europe weren't even built in one generation. These were a vision of a people that went over time. And if we could bring that to our daily lives, so every man, woman, and child believed they were building something, building towards something, building a better them. Because We want I mean, I'm a father. I want my children to be better than me. I want them to be stronger than me, more intelligent than me. And we should see our society as that it is a building up. Yes, we've fallen, but we know we can grow. So we need to start bringing in a harmony and balance amongst all of our in every aspect of our life, because we all know that in nearly all, like I say, every aspect of our life, that balance is a key. It's not that you shouldn't drink ever, but drinking in moderation balance is the beauty. And they push the extremes. They get on the one side crazy people and another side crazy people, and then they set them off against each other to fight. And for the most part, most of the public just looks at both sides as idiots. You know what I mean? They don't really care for any of their opinions. We must be the balance. Sorry, I went off.
I think it comes down to one word. Yeah, that harmony, that balance.
Yeah,
we have the twin aspect in us of that love of stewarding nature. Like Jason has said, he's put this question, this poll on Entropy about rescuing animals. And that speaks to one part of us, but we're also the people who fly rockets into outer space. And we talk about this sometimes on the show. Those are the two twin drives. And there's a technological expressions, there's emotional expressions of these, but it's balancing those. And we're still working on that.
Yeah, it's a big subject. And but they actually speak to the two types of our nature, that caring, compassionate side, and that side that wants a challenge. We're not ones to rest on our laurels. In fact, sometimes I think we make things harder for ourselves almost on purpose, because we need that. We like the underdog, and we like to be the underdog. Even though we're so powerful, we like to give ourselves limited odds. I mean, I could relay countless stories where soldiers or military battles where they were outnumbered, and it was almost as if them being outnumbered gave them the victory. It was that fact that they stood and they knew that there was something special about that moment that forged them. And that's something that's in us. It's if you look at thrill seekers generally, and I'm talking like people that do that parkour where they jump over these really high buildings and stuff. It's white kids. You look at other groups of people and what they say about it. They think we're crazy white boys doing it, because we got that sense of adventure, putting our life in our own hands, our own skill at that level of fault. It's quite an interesting, but something obviously for another discussion now, because it's obviously closing down now.
No, but I'm glad that you said it, because it's an important thing to be said, and we desperately need to understand ourselves so that we get the balances right again. I do have something else to end on, but Jason, it seemed like you have something, my friend.
Well, indeed, I would just briefly speak to what Phil was adroitly discussing right there, and that is that this is the biospirit of Western kind. It is the motivator behind our greatest achievements, this passion, the spirit to conquer the unknown, to conquer sickness, to conquer the elements of the world. That is why we have delivered all of mankind as a consequence of our passion, intelligence, and this desire, delivered us all from the bestial elements and bestial life of the mire and the jungle. That is why we are able to have electricity, why we are able to live in homes where the climate is controlled. It's why we are able to cure diseases. It's why, unfortunately, at the same time, we are able to hold so much of the jungle at bay in so many forms, for the forms of predators, of the anti-whites, of predators, of anti-white non-whites who want to come into our countries and who feign signs that appeal to us and our nature, that all of these sorts of things now that we have raised and elevated our people to such an extent that I've referred to it before as a nursery room we have made of Western civilization. And now we have people concluding that we can do things and take acts with the natural world, with the actual jungle beyond our civilization, that will unquestionably put an end to our civilization. Just a quick example that comes to mind is when it comes to law and order in a country. We punish people who break the law only in small part, because that corrects or mends the behavior of the individual. We have laws in place to prevent these things, and we enforce the law. We enforce the law, or should be enforcing the law, against these interlopers sneaking into our country, whether it's with the help of some anti-white lawyer who helps them sneak into the country by telling them exactly what they need to say and do to get in, or some other trickster or underhanded effort to furtively sneak them in the back of a boxcar or something of this nature. We enforce the law because when you don't enforce the law, you lose civilization, ladies and gentlemen. That is the big picture. Why do you lose civilization? It's a bit of an IQ test. The reason why is because you end up incentivizing and making a smart decision out of disobeying the law by allowing some to get away with breaking the law. That is why we enforce law in civilization. That is the 10,000-foot view of why we have law and enforce norms on people. Because when you don't, you normalize and you make the right choice, the incentivized choice for the smartest members of that society, and they will figure it out rapidly that the smart choice is one in which is one that they will take, and it is one that will, in the end, and quite readily, quite quickly, destroys civilization. So we've been away from it for too long, but this is a glorious spirit that's in us. And we would never have come to this point had it not been for these injurious and insidious elements among our people who have bitten us like the viper from the leaf litter rather than stood against us as an honorable man in combat. But I said it yesterday and I'll say it again today. You need to be not one jot more virtuous than your victimizer, because if you are, you will lose every time. Yesterday, I gave the analogy of the boxer who has agreed to go into the ring to box his opponent. And when he gets there, if you are that boxer, when you get there and you see your opponent holds a scimitar and a suit of armor, do you go ahead and fight him in the ring with your boxing gloves and die and be a loser and say in your death throes, at least I fought the way we had agreed to fight? No. The new answer of being moral, the new answer of being correct, win from now on. That is what's virtuous for our people. I have a final super chat. Exactly, 30-year-old boomer remembered what I said yesterday. I've said many times before that I say, if they fight with fire, we fight with inferno. We have a final super chat over on Entropy by the great Roy Danton. Super chatting with $50. Thank you, good and kind sir, for that munificent investment in the cause of white well-being, the work we are doing here. Writing, just wanted to say thank you for all the amazing work that you are doing and give you a little donation. I watched yesterday's Going Free in replay, and it was such empowering and inspiring. Thank you very much for that kind donation, investment, and the good, kind words. It is an honor to serve with you, Roy, and all of you, and with my colleague, Jared George, and Phil, our honorable guest here tonight. And I will pass it back to Jared so that we can get the final question and begin to wrap things up, tap out for tonight. So, Jared, please, sir.
Well, Roy Danton wants the crown again, I would presume. Super Chat crown winner. Yes. He has a trophy room, growing trophy cabinet. Well, thank you again, Roy, and everyone who is contributing tonight and having this very interesting conversation. There's very interesting conversation going on in the chat about, again, these themes that we've been establishing, something that I think about all the time, and I'm trying to come to a better understanding at and balance in my own life. These intersections between technology and quote-unquote civilization, what we call civilization, and these more natural ways, the urban and the rural and all of that. Very interesting. I'm going to ask a question that is more lighthearted, but don't be fooled, because I really do think that there's something profound here. Anyone who's listened to me for a while knows that I think this is one of the key things, and that is our instincts, our, as Jason says, biospirit, how it carries out through time eternally, even though at times it may be perverted or muted or buried or subverted, etc. And something that you said and highlight in some of your videos, there's several times of the year we could focus on, but even though we're in the heat of summer for most of us right now, I think Yule, midwinter, is the most profound one, because I think we can all remember, I certainly remember as a child, and I'm happy to say now as an adult, I still am in touch with this. There is truly just a transportive magic about that time of year, roughly the month of December. There's a different feeling to it. Sometimes it's almost like you're living in a different consciousness if you really let it sweep over you. And you, Phil, have talked about how this time of year was the most important time of year for our ancestors for millennia. You know, when you talk to friends or family about their identity and getting back in touch with the folk soul, and all this stuff might sound heady and out there and weird. Guys, it's right under our noses. It's right in front of our eyes. Every year, was certainly with all of our holidays, there's a magic to Halloween as well. Jason and I love Halloween. We'll do things around Halloween, but let's just keep it focused. I started with Yule, so we'll go with that. All of the things that we do at that time and the feeling that we have, the rituals, the way we get together with family, that is deeply impressed upon us in our minds, in our genes. So, Phil, if there's anything that you could leave us with on that kind of note.
Well, I'll try. Well, I mean, firstly, like I say, it's very hard to know what our ancestors thought at this time when they were building monuments in Great Britain and all over Europe in honor of these things. But we know that something, for example, of Stonehenge was definitely more of a Yule celebration. Archaeological digs show massive feasts. And because of the age of the boars, etc., we know that these would have been taking place around Yule. As we talked about earlier, when trying to remove ourselves from our modern perspectives and we take ourselves back in time, we see that this is the darkest night of the year, which it's the middle of winter. The sun is about to be reborn, and I think that symbol of that now, although we may not fully understand it from their perspective, lives on today. I mean, Christmas is around the same time, right? Now, there's a lot of arguments in Christian communities where that comes from, and it's almost certainly that it was the date of Jesus' birth was imposed upon this time of year to convince us that their religion was a good one, for lack of a better term there. But and even at that time, we have things like, New Year's resolutions. We have the New Year at the same time as well. It's hyper-focused. New Year's resolutions, so that's kind of like a rebirth. You're coming out of darkness. You're seeing your bad habits. It's a time that in the North would have been for long reflection, right? Right now, we're just gone past the middle of summer. My children don't want to go to bed till the sun's gone down, right? So they're jumping around and happy, but they go to bed much earlier in the winter. And there's that time you can't, make hay while the sun shines. In the summer, you're working, you're busy doing all this. In the winter, there's a great time for reflection. And I think in reflection, a lot of things come to us just about how we want to be better. So we see that come through in New Year's resolutions, but also gathering together, really valuing those we love. Because in those dark times, that's when their presence is felt most, because when you're having fun, it's easy to forget. When you're in darkness, it's easy to people's qualities really shine through. They're keeping you company, and I think all of this shows of these feelings are ancestral. They go back, I say, for thousands of years, and I think it comes out of the notion that, and even some people see the sun. Some archaeologists and thinkers back there see the sun as almost a connection to the ancestors. So that darkest night is the less connection to the ancestors, so they're remembered more. It's like you've got to celebrate them to bring them back, come back, rise again.
Yeah, there's a tradition of Christmas ghost stories. It's kind of been on the wane in recent decades, but people forget there's a ghost story tradition around Christmas as well that connects to that.
This is something I always say. If you want to know about the past, you can find it out through tradition. Things don't change as much as people think. Yes, the paraphernalia around it, and it might have been twisted or inverted, but with a little bit of knowledge, you can start unwrapping what we see today. I mean, I'm called Mimir's Brunnr, which is the well Mim as well. Well of
Yeah,
memory.
we didn't even talk about the name. If you want to tell people about that name for a moment, please do
But
so.
it links in, right? Now, it's a well of memory, and Woden puts his eye in it to know all that has been, so we can decide what is, because that's ultimate knowledge. One eye on the past, one eye on the future. When you know all that has been, you know its direction the world is taking. If I know your route, where you're going, I can probably predict where you're going to end up. Yeah, if I watch it over a certain amount of time, so it's about prediction. But wells, the reason I chose that name though for a wider example, because obviously I want to rekindle that memory of our past, so we know better to how to align ourselves with our futures. But water for me is a very spiritual. I'm more inclined to water worship and water veneration, as did our ancestors for thousands of years. But we might go, well, we don't do that anymore, and it's hardly talked about. Even pagan groups, they never talk about it. It's very, very talked about it. But every one of us has flicked a coin into a wishing well. Well, that is an act of a votive offering, giving something of value to the water that extends back to the earliest worship of gods and goddesses in the north and the planet. And yet we still do it. It's right there in our faces. Every child does it. And children do it because they still believe. They have that magic. And there is a childlike nature to the European in his belief and sense of duty, which his attention to detail. That's childlike. I know people don't think, but you watch a child, man, he could be going to the toilet to block it up with something, but they know what they're doing and they're doing it. they're totally in tune with who they are. I mean, I talk about this in one of our videos, Land, Children and Community, but and we have some of those high qualities of the child, which some people don't. But yeah, so the wishing well is a great example of how we can look at tradition to find a much more powerful aspect of the source. Everything's been reduced, of course, and the same with Yule. Like I say, if we look at all these celebrations, then enhance them, we'll probably get something quite spectacular. I wish I could visit them, go back a few thousand years and just be present. Be quite an experience.
Well, we just have to bring it into the present.
Yeah, try to remember and rebirth it like the sun.
Because their whole concept of time also is different, where we can reconnect with it, and they're closer than we think. So it's a great point to end on. I feel a great resonance with you, Phil. I love this talk, and I thank you so much for what you're doing and putting all of yourself into this. Jason, any housekeeping?
Yes, we have a little bit of housekeeping I guess we can do, and we can move toward that as we wrap up this spectacular show today. And I'll thank everybody who showed up in the chat to watch live and who will be with us in replay. Thank you all. God bless you all for your service to white well-being. And a big thank you to Phil, our guest, for appearing with us today. And we hope you will return. Of course, a big thank you to my colleague Jared George for all the hard work that he does. Let's get some final thoughts from Phil. And if you could tell people what you're working on next, where people can find you. Again, folks, all of his links are down in the description below. But Phil, I will give that mic over to you and your final words, sir, please.
Well, no, firstly, I'd like to thank both you and Jared for taking the time to have me on your show. I've greatly enjoyed it too, Jared. Very interesting conversation. Like I say, I think we could probably talk for hours and hours. And go off on many different tangents. I mean, we just struck, and I got lost on a few points here and there. But so it's been a lot of fun, and I've very much enjoyed it. As for what we're doing in the future, we are going to do a video version of the article I wrote, Remembering. We do want to do a video on civilization where I'm going to propose an alternative view that I haven't fully researched yet, which is a bit of a shame because I could have brought more of it up tonight. But we've got quite a few, the Kimbrian War finales coming, which is going to be a bit longer, and it's going to be able to be a standalone piece too. So it should be able to attract viewers to it and try and remember them. A lot of my work, obviously, is about remembering our ancestors and seeing what we can, and bringing that knowledge forward, as I said before. So, but we've got quite a few. We're going to be working on some slightly longer videos now, which means that we might not be able to get them out every 2 weeks. But we've been trying to get ahead for the last few months by doing short videos, but it never really works. So And our longer videos like Consequence of Cowardice are obviously our most popular. So we're going to be working on some longer ones. If people just bear with us, they will be done and good. But no, thanks again for having me on. It's been really, really great.
It has absolutely been our pleasure. We will have you back as soon as we possibly can, and potentially on some of our other shows that Jared and I do, which we'll be catching back up on after we have caught our breath, our collective breath with all of the censorship, the wave that hit the entire sphere. But Jared,
we have to do more, Jason. I don't know. Where are those magic pills so that you don't have to sleep? Because there's so many great guests, and it's not enough just to do these shows. The schedule we're on, we'll have to figure something out. I don't know. We're gonna have to create a network, I guess. We're gonna have to do it, guys. We're gonna have to go pro. We're gonna have to figure something out.
Yeah, amen to that. Well, Jared, now that you have moved into other avenues, other veins, where can people find you, the work you're doing, and what you're working on next?
Well, I always tell people that if you remember one thing, go to my website. That's what I really have the control over, especially in light of what happened to my original YouTube channel a little over a month ago at this point. We all know that I got caught up in the Vox adpocalypse. And there are others, small channels that have been deleted as well. White Date has been deleted from YouTube, so please go subscribe to our friend Liv from Germany on BitChute. I just shared my BitChute link in the chat as well. But I try to be a good archivist for myself, and hopefully that doesn't sound too grandiose, but I try to make it easy for you. So everything I do, I try to organize well on my site, thegreatorder.com. And that's not only videos, but other things that I'm involved with, at least publicly, of course. So please do go there, and you can contact me. You can support. There's a mailing list. I haven't really been active yet, but I am trying to collect email addresses, because if all this social media went away tomorrow, at least we would be in contact that way. I do have a new YouTube channel. Most of you probably know this, but if you see what I've been writing from in the chat, Jared George, just my name, it is there. And I did the live stream with a lot of friends from around the world the week after my old channel was taken off. And if you don't see that anymore, don't be alarmed. I actually removed it and I put it on BitChute. So I might do some things like that. I'm going to put videos on BitChute first. In the case of extra streams, not this show you're watching now, because the after party we do on Jason's channel here on No White Guilt. But there's other things, and then there might just be these one-off streams. If I just decide to stream, I might do it on YouTube, but then put the recording on BitChute. And of course, I'm still looking into other viable ways to stream in general. There's just a lot to do, a lot of ideas of how to work around this. The main thing is we're here, we're connected, we're together. And as long as we keep our eyes on that, the platforms are secondary. So please do make sure that you follow us in many places. As I said, try to be as direct in contact with us as you can, and we'll figure this all out together. But Jason and I are looking at all different ways to become more robust and to protect ourselves against what I'm sure there'll be further hurdles. It's no use in denying that. We have to prepare for it. They're going to come for us again. They're going to try to throw a roadblock in front of us again. It's all right. It's part of the deal. We're mentally prepared for it, and we're making the practical preparations for it as well. But as always, it's a tremendous honor and pleasure to be doing this here with you all. And I'll hand it over to Jason to say goodnight.
Thank you very much, good sir. It is a supreme honor to be able to work with you. And ladies and gentlemen, please, let's give a big round of applause for all of the hard work that Jared George does. He is beyond words. It's ineffable how grateful I am for the relationship I have with Jared and the things that we are able to do together, amplified by many times for white well-being because of our relationship. And so it is a really meaningful relationship to me, and I thank Jared very much for being here with us every single day in the cause for white well-being. I noticed as we are tapping out of this episode of Tap, that our good friend Underhill has shown up, and he has a little message of a little pig and a guy chasing, and a little pig and a guy. Of course, that is harkening back to Jones saying that we were just a bunch of pig chasers, and that caused Marcolette to purchase the little pig to show on air on Power each Wednesday.
It's a terrible meme that must die because it's untrue and it's harmful to our people in all seriousness.
Well, I think, in fact, during that, right after Jones left, saying that we were just a bunch of pig chasers, I had some audio play of pigs squealing in the background, and we had a laugh about his idea that we were chasing pigs. And again, we here on TAP, we here on the No White Guilt channel, never contradict the official narrative of histories of countries that the regime gives for us to consume. But there has been a story that came out just the other day, and people can look into this for themselves, about a pyramid structure discovered in Greece that I think that they said they were roughly dating at 4,000 years of age, white marble or stone or something of this nature. So I assume when we weren't busy gathering piglets from the woods, we were building these pyramids and circumnavigate. Now, of course, this is a theory. Everybody at YouTube, no reason to panic. No conspiracy theories that you would object to. Luke,
well, I'll just quickly say too about the Northern European peoples. And Phil, I don't know if this was Tacitus or someone else, but I remember reading recently that the wood beams in the halls, and again, we don't have the remains because they were using wood, not marble. But the description by the Romans of you couldn't even see the seams in the wood. The construction was so precise and perfect in these grand halls that does not sound like a people that were just chasing pigs around in the woods in their loincloths.
Well, I mean, I will add about the pig, which would be a boar back then. A boar is an especially sacred animal. And not only that, a boar is a tenacious animal. A boar, you can watch videos, there's many videos on YouTube. When a boar gets shot, it doesn't run. It turns and faces its adversary. Mm-hmm. And even in in the Middle Ages, they called the boar a spiteful animal because even when it was speared to death, it could still come and kill you. It is an absolutely ferocious creature, and it was actually a measure of strength to capture a boar. And
we eat them. We gain their strength.
We didn't even eat them that often, actually.
Now I mean, Jason and I like pork.
No, what they did was the boar itself was, when we find it, I mean, sometimes they ate it, of course, but a lot of it was votive offerings, burnt offerings to the gods and goddesses. It was the meal of the gods and goddesses, and it was normally favored for her because it is intimately attached to the female goddess. But I'll leave it there because I could talk about that all night as well.
Well, we'll bring you back to talk about it. It sounds like an interesting subject. I do want to point out that I saw that Luke showed up, and we talked about you a little bit at the very beginning of the show. Luke says hello and hope you are having a great evening. And not only that, but Luke went spelunking down into the description in the final closing minutes of the show and super chatted $75. Thank you very much for that kind investment in the closing minutes. Actually, we are in the first overdrive of TAP as we're tapping out.
Watch out, Roy. He's giving you a run for your money.
Right. And Luke writes, just a little support for three great men. Well, you're a great man yourself, Luke. Hats off to you. A big spotlight and applause to you, my good friend. Let's see. I want to thank a lot of people who showed up in the chat tonight. There were so many wonderful people. Thank you all who were in the chat participating. Thank you all who are just sitting at home, either live or in replay or both, and going free by way of listening to us and finding out that you are not alone. And those of you who have reached out to this Nat Connect project as well, we wish you the best. You are absolutely not alone. We are a massive and rapidly growing community of love and faith and redemption for Western kind and Western civilization, and we heartily welcome you to this community. I want to thank some people I saw in the chat. I saw Lapis, I saw Justin, Arian was in there as well. Jamie was here. Marie Antoinette was here. Carasius was here as well. Patricia and Raidwald, I think that's how that's pronounced. was here as well. Great to see you all. A big thank you to all of our moderators. I know I saw there was Syrup, Spartan Warrior Queen, there was Phoenix. I saw Mother Hen in there. I don't know if she did any moderation today, but if she did, thank you very much. These are people who are working on their own dime and on their own time. And our heartfelt thanks goes out to them as well to keep us safe in the comments section. A place where people can share ideas, grow in knowledge, instead of a place where there is violent speech, anti-white showing up, pretending to be us, and trying to get the channel kicked off of YouTube. So thank you all for those efforts. It is a heroic thing to be on the front lines against the anti-whites. Again, a big thank you to Jared for the work he's done. And Phil, we hope you will come back as soon as we will have you. And folks, there's nothing more to say than I wish you all a blessed next couple of days until Jared and I see you all again. And we look forward to that moment here on Tap next time. Good night.